Welcome to another edition of Brothers in Cars. My name's Rob Akins. This is my brother, Fred Akins. Fred is a 30 plus year veteran of the auto industry, and I'm just a guy who likes talking about cars. So together we like to just talk about things that interest us. And today we're going to be covering a situation that came up in Chicago last week, and it's been all over the news, so you probably have heard about it. That was a charging station, specifically, it's kind of surprisingly, a Tesla supercharging or charger station in Chicago. And I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We've been getting hit with some very frigid temperatures. And so the situation was that you had 25 or 30 odd Teslas that had pulled into the supercharging station and the cars were not charging. And so you had a whole bunch of people in 0-degree weather, or if not sub-zero, trying to get their cars recharged so they could make their way home or wherever they were going. And so I'm going to bring up a story on them. And just to kind of give you some context here. So Chicago area Tesla drivers stranded as charging stations not working in bitterly cold weather. So, Fred, you've heard a little bit about this story as well. What have you heard about what happened?
Well, basically, what I've heard happened is what's been reported, which is there were these Teslas at the supercharger station, and for a variety of reasons, they were either not charging at all, or they were charging extremely slowly. And I've come to learn that in extreme cold weather, EVs charge very differently than they do at, say, more temperate temperatures, like 60, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. At sub-zero temperatures, it has to do with the battery chemistry and the chemistry of the physical properties of the superchargers themselves, especially the DC fast chargers. Now, the ideal is even if you live in a really cold place like Chicago, or in your case, Green Bay, if you've got a dedicated garage, an attached garage on your house, and you have a level 2 charger and you can plug in overnight, then you're probably fine. And you're going, what's this fuss all about? Right. But in the city of Chicago, not everyone has that. They either have a detached, unheated garage, or even worse, they're apartment or condo dwellers, and they have no garage parking, and they're parked on the street in those sub-zero temperatures. And that's where things get a little sticky, because the battery, in order to charge at its optimal rate, has to be preconditioned to accept the full rate of charge. And if it can't, then it's going to basically be like filling your fuel tank, your gas tank, up with an eyedropper. It's going to be that slow.
Yeah. And I think yeah, go ahead.
As they discovered in Chicago, the chargers or the batteries, the batteries won't accept the charge. They just won't. Or the superchargers stop functioning at extremely low temperatures.
And I think that's one of the parts of this article, which is from a Chicago ABC affiliate, that at the charging station near 95th Street and Western Avenue in Evergreen Park, many Tesla owners were stranded with dead batteries from the cold. Drivers said there were not enough working chargers at the location. And this person was quoted as saying that our batteries are so cold, it's taking longer to charge now. So what should take 45 minutes is taking 2 hours. for the one charger we have. I've seen at least 10 cars get towed away because the cars, they died. They had run out of battery. It's too cold. It uses too much of the energy to try to keep the car somewhat reasonable temperature. So everybody is getting towed away and we have nowhere to charge. And this is something that we've touched on before, not with specifically the cold weather, but the infrastructure that people who do not have that optimum situation that you just described are going to have to figure out a way to live with true electric vehicles. And I think statistically, most electric vehicles are purchased by people who are more wealthy, affluent. And statistically, when you, especially in California, where I think over 30% of all EVs sold in the US are sold in California, people who have money in California tend to have houses with garages. And so that's all well and good, but when you get into these city dwellings, and I saw a story on New York City where it had I can't remember exactly, but the city has millions and millions and millions of vehicles, but only less than 1% of them are EVs. And you would think New York tends to be a pretty progressive, environmentally aware kind of place. But the story that I was reading was saying that it's largely because of what you were just talking about. People need public charging, and the public chargers are either not working, not compatible with the vehicle that they're driving, or as one guy, there was a half a block of public charging stations, but there was a city of New York vehicle parked, an electric vehicle parked, hooked up to every one of these chargers. And on these chargers, you could see how long they had been charging. Some had been charging for over 24 hours. Because in New York, you find a parking space, you don't want to give up your parking space. So this is the whole thing that we're trying to get into, this chicken or egg situation, where how do people live with EVs when they don't have their own dedicated charger? And that's a real problem.
Well, to give you an example, I have a friend who is a journalist. They're in the city of Chicago, and she's been having to go down to Indianapolis, which is a fairly simple 3-hour drive. I've done it a number of times, or near Indianapolis. And she has written extensively about her travails in driving EVs from her home in Chicago, where she has a garage and a dedicated charger, down to her parents' home in the suburbs around Indianapolis. And she's had a couple of trips this winter that have been just an absolute nightmare. So that's, let's see, it's about 200 or so miles, I think, roughly. So it's about, let's say, 3 hours from Chicago down to her parents' home. And on a couple of her trips, she spent as much time trying to charge the EV that she's driving. She drives various EVs from different manufacturers. Just trying to charge the EV has taken her as much or more time than the actual drive itself. Now, if you're somebody who's grown up, pull into a gas station, put the hose in the tank, run inside to use the restroom or to buy a snack, run back out, you hear the thing go click, and you're done. That's a complete sea change in terms of mindset.
Right.
So, it, you know, even as good as EVs have gotten, and there are some really good ones out there, and I've driven most of them, the infrastructure is just not ready for prime time.
And that's one of the things that I worry about with the mandates that we're seeing out of Washington, you in California. Government is very good, as we like to say, at saying, well, you need to do this because I said so. And thinking that, well, because it's going to be a mandate, because it's going to be forced on them, people will adjust and they will be ready in time to follow through on what the new law is or the new regulation is. But the problem is, to me, especially in a situation where houses are a lot more expensive, it's never been harder to buy a house for the average American. And so if you're trying to live by the rules and you want to get an EV because you like the convenience, the environmental aspect of it, or you just think they're really cool, you have to make sure that you think through all these things. And in some ways, there's so many details that have not been worked out yet that I just don't see any way that, no matter how much the government pushes for this, that the majority of car drivers are going to be able to live with it unless the infrastructure is ready when that time comes. And I've seen studies where the optimum charger to vehicle ratio is around 7 vehicles for every charger. And we would need to build across the country, I think we needed 2.5 times more chargers than we have now. And that's not even talking about getting the wiring in place, getting the electrical generation up to snuff. And then we haven't even talked about the whole American with Disabilities Act. How are you going to deal with that? Because what if you're an 80-year-old person, maybe you are even younger? What if you've got mobility issues? What if you can't walk between some of these tight charger, car park charger situations, or you don't have the strength to get the charging cord to hook into the vehicle? Because I've seen full-grown 200-pound guys have to unhook and rehook the charging cables 2 or 3 times pretty forcefully to get them to work. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that needs to be worked out, and I don't think that it's getting the right attention. We're putting literally we're putting the cart before the horse in this situation.
That's a good point. And what I find most telling about these mandates, and as you said, and I've said before, a mandate is nothing more than the governmental version of the parental "because I said so, damn it." Mm-hmm. And what happens is, with all of these mandates, the mandates always seem to be for, they seem to be built on the premise of, if you build the EVs, the customers will come.
Right.
Just miraculously. They will just show up in the showroom and go, yes, instead of buying the gasoline powered vehicle that I've been buying for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they're going to say, nope, I'm going to throw all that knowledge and infrastructure away, and I'm going to adopt this new lifestyle. And the problem is, yes, the government has mandated the sale of EVs. What the government has not done, tellingly, is mandate a corresponding upgrade to the charging infrastructure or the power generation grid or any of the, as you and I would call it, behind the curtain blocking and tackling stuff.
Well, if I wanted to be cynical, which I'm not against being, I would say that's partially because there's no money in that, or there's not as much money in it. But number two, it's a lot harder to actually do that because the government has to be a lot more involved and take responsibility for upgrading the power grid and upgrading the number of charging stations that are out there. Right now, they put these mandates out there, and it's more, you guys do this. Manufacturers, you got to stop building internal combustion vehicles and hybrids and so forth. You've got to get the EVs ready. There have to be enough EVs to sell to everybody. And I just pulled this chart up, and it's amazing. Almost every one of these charts that I look at has this nice, smooth rise in EV sales.
Yeah, it looks kind of like a hockey stick.
Yeah, it's just a nice, it doesn't even have to be a hockey stick, but yeah, it's a nice, smooth ride.
You get to a certain point and you get this almost exponential growth. And right. I it's funny, a couple of years ago, I remember reading all these stories about how EVs were going to hit the tipping point as soon as they got to 10% of the market. At 10% of the market, that's when it was going to go, like I said, hockey stick, and EV sales were just going to take off.
Yeah, and
well, we're a year or so past that point, and that's not happening. And in fact, it seems like the EV curve, the adoption curve, is actually, I mean, it's not turning down, but the rate of growth over the last couple of years, post-pandemic, the growth curve has suddenly flattened out.
Yeah, and to that point, this was kind of an interesting chart that was on a CNN business article. And the U.S. agency predicts the EV majority, or an EV majority market, won't happen anytime soon. And what they did was they're looking at, okay, in 2023, we're not quite 10%. And then they looked at, okay, well, what happens? What are the projections if oil prices basically remain the same? That's this dotted line. What happens if they actually fall? Well, that's that dotted line. What happens if they shoot way up to like $190 a barrel? Well, that's going to lead to a faster adoption. But look what happens out here around 2030, 2032, 2034. Every one of these lines kind of maxes out around 30%.
Which is really funny, because the California and other state mandates say that by 2030 or 2035, 100% of the new vehicles are supposed to be EVs.
Right.
Whoops.
Yeah. And this is according to projections.
Suddenly the math doesn't math.
Right. And we talk about the affluence of the typical person who buys an EV being kind of a top 25%er at the very least. But
you're probably talking top 10 or top 5%.
Yeah, it might even be that. But if you just look at how much people are struggling with paying for groceries and just paying for auto repair, let alone buying new vehicles. And some people say, oh, well, EVs, they have so much less maintenance that you don't have to spend as much money on repairs and so forth. But here's the little secret. Insurance companies are much faster to total an EV than they are an internal combustion vehicle of the same age, because of the battery damage, the potential for battery damage. They just rather write the thing off. And then what happens? Well, number one, you have to pay a heck of a lot more money to insure the thing. But number two, if there is repairable damage, the typical bill is a lot higher, or can be a lot higher. I should always
Yes.
couch that. But if there's any damage to the battery, that's one of the reasons. There's another story here, and this is the last one I'll share. But Hertz made a big deal out of the fact that they were going to
yes, a couple of years ago, my old friend Mark Fields, who I'd worked with when he was at Mazda, made a big splash when he announced that Hertz was going to make this huge buy of Tesla, I think Model 3s and Model Ys, and also they bought a bunch of Polestars, which are the Chinese-owned Volvo subsidiary that makes EVs. And this month, they suddenly, Hertz, which is now under, has a new CEO, they announced that they were going to drastically cut by 1/3, I think, their EV fleet. And their rationale for doing that was that the EVs were not making them money, or not making them as much money, because they had, I think, overestimated the demand for EVs among renters. Because let's face it, if you're driving in and around the city of Chicago for business meetings or whatever, and you're in an EV, that's one thing. If you're flying into Chicago and driving up to, say, Green Bay, Wisconsin, yes, your Tesla will make it, but once you get there, where do you charge?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I anecdotally have a friend who was recently taking a Hawaii vacation around between Christmas and New Year's, and she posted on Facebook, just out of the blue, if you ever think about renting a Tesla in Hawaii, don't do it. And she recounted the story of, even though actually she got a deal on the Tesla compared to a regular gas-powered vehicle, it was less expensive, but she couldn't find any place to charge the thing. And she was staying at a nice resort. And I don't know if it was because the resort only had 1 or 2 or 3 chargers, because normally if you're staying at a nicer resort, they do have some infrastructure there. But she was just lamenting her decision to rent a Tesla in Hawaii, because she wanted to take drives around the island, and she didn't feel comfortable doing it because she didn't know where the next charger was going to be, and so forth. And see, that's the thing about anxieties. It's you can say, wow, Maui, for example, is not that big an island. You're not going to run out of juice if you start with a full charge. You're not going to drive 200 plus miles. But anxiety is not always in the rational mind.
Exactly.
And if you have that concern, especially in her situation, single mom with her daughter, and she doesn't necessarily want to be stuck on the side of the road with no juice in the vehicle in a place she doesn't know. And so anyway, to the point about Hertz, they said in a government filing Thursday, and this is just last week, Hertz Global Holdings Incorporated said it started selling almost 20,000 EVs from its U.S. fleet last month. It said that it will continue the sale throughout the year, citing higher expenses on EVs related to collision and damage, which is what we were talking about, as well as lower than anticipated demand for EVs, which erodes resale value, and that's the reason for the shift. So again, here we are. Anybody who's renting a Tesla on a vacation by definition, they're on a vacation. They're not at home. They don't have the dedicated charger. Now, maybe they're visiting somebody who has a dedicated charger that they can tap into at their home. But most people aren't. Most people are staying in hotels or Airbnbs where they may not have these kind of facilities.
Amenities.
Yeah. And so this is real life. This is not the theoretical plane. This is the real plane.
Yes. Well, I can shed a little bit more light on the Hertz situation.
Okay.
With respect to the collision damage, a bunch of these EVs Hertz was renting to rideshare drivers.
Yeah.
Uber and Lyft and whatnot. And who would have thought that rideshare drivers driving somebody else's vehicle might not be super careful in how they drove said vehicle? And as you and I, having rented vehicles for business and pleasure, know, sometimes the fastest vehicle you can drive is a rental. Especially when you're trying to rush back to the airport, having squeezed every last drop out of your vacation or business trip.
Right.
And it's just get me there. If I have to drive over that particular median to get to the exit that I need to get to, by God, I'm going to do it because I'm not paying for this thing. I'm not stuck with the payments.
Right. And then, yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, that was perhaps a miscalculation on the part of Hertz, in that maybe they were renting to people. There's a reason that they didn't have their own vehicle that was suitable for rideshare.
Right. Exactly. And so anyway, interesting, always an interesting topic. Again, I will remind anybody who's watching this who thinks that, oh, these guys just hate EVs. That's not true.
No, I've driven EVs. I've developed EVs. I really like a lot of things about EVs, but EVs don't work for everybody. And it would be really nice if the government would actually recognize that.
Exactly. And the infrastructure thing, I've likened it to building a new shining city out in the middle of the desert before you've arranged for water, sewer, and utilities to be ready when the people move in. It's not going to end well. So hopefully the government reprioritizes how they've got the timeline laid out. They put a lot more attention on getting the charging stations in place, getting thinking through how are they going to make these available, make enough chargers available at an affordable price for people who are median income and lower, who may not own their own home, where they can charge at $15 per kilowatt hour, 15 cents per kilowatt hour, versus some of these public charging stations where they're 40, 50, even 60 cents per kilowatt hour, where all of a sudden you're paying the equivalent of $5, $6, $7 per gallon gasoline to charge your EVs. And that's fine if you're in California where you're used to higher gas prices. But if you're in Texas where the gas prices are $2.40 and you're having to use a public charging station that is costing you basically twice that, all of a sudden the luster of EVs kind of fades a little bit. So again, hopefully we can get this figured out and not rush into it where we find ourselves in a crisis situation where the government has said, yes, you need to do this, and the car companies say, oh, no, we can't we can't make it happen. It's just not gonna work. And then you start getting, getting the Rams butting their heads together. And
Well, that's when the lawyers get involved, and unfortunately, the lawyers wind up making all the money.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody for watching. If you like this video, please like it, share it, and leave a comment below. We always appreciate your input. And if you like hearing about EVs, let us know. If you're tired of hearing about EVs, let us know, because we want to make sure that we're putting things up that not only interest us, but also interest you. So we'll see.
Well, one of the things we can start talking about now that we're after the first of the year is motorsports, because racing season is right around the corner.
Yes, and there's lots to talk about with that. So maybe in the next video or two that we put out, we'll be talking about something fun, something that people actually do because they want to do it, not because they have to do it.
Wonderful.
Take care, everyone, and we will see you soon.
Thanks for watching.